Star Trek Voyager, Starfleet Academy, Quarantine, Chapter 1. Psst! Kathryn! Kathryn Janeway jumped in her seat. Embarrassed to be caught not paying attention, she blushed and turned to the cadet sitting one empty seat away from her. "What?" she said, trying not to sound too frazzled, then smiled when she realized who had called her name. "Oh, Geordi! Hi! Here's the data you asked for yesterday on the geologic instability of Primrose 4, said Geordi LaForge, reaching over and passing a yellow data disk to Kathryn. Like Kathryn, Geordi was a first-year cadet and was in several of her classes. And he just happened to have a knack for finding the most obscure information from the most amazing sources. Just hypertext the words mega volcanic activity. There are tons of references to the event. Kathryn reached for the data disk. You're a lifesaver, Geordi. Thanks. How did you find all this information so quickly? Someday you'll have to show me how you do it. Ha! That'll be the day, he said, running his hand through his short dark hair. That little secret may be my ticket to making it through Starfleet Academy. That is, if I can make it through gym class. Kathryn chuckled. Really, thanks, Geordi. I'll check it over and get it back to you. She hesitated. As soon as I can. No hurry, Geordi answered. I just wanted to make sure you had it before I forgot to give it to you. Did that make sense? Kathryn sometimes didn't know if Geordi was joking or not. He wore a visor, visual instrument and sensory organ replacement. A metal device that wrapped around half of his head and covered his eyes and gave him headaches. Blind since birth, Geordi needed the visor to see the world around him. Kathryn knew enough about visor technology to know that Geordi could see the full electromagnetic spectrum. He could interpret objects at different wavelengths, from the infrared to the ultraviolet. More than that. In other words, in ways that Kathryn couldn't see. Don't worry, she said, still smiling at the cadet. Nothing makes too much sense to me today anyway. She stuffed the disc into her jumpsuit pocket and turned her attention to the front of the large auditorium. Timothy Wang, a friend of Kathryn's and a first-year cadet in several of her classes, was poised at the podium, beginning his lecture on the fluid dynamics of space shuttles in a thin atmosphere. She concentrated on Timothy's lecture, but for only a few minutes, and she began to squirm in her seat. She really tried to listen to his lecture, not only because she was interested in shuttle design, but she would also have to give a lecture in front of the class, a requirement for this systems dynamics course. But her mind was definitely somewhere else. In fact, my mind is so far removed from this auditorium that I might as well be on Saturn, she thought. Kathryn knew very well why her mind was elsewhere. She and 4 other cadets, Timothy, Mary LeCoux, Blinar, and Laswa Rana, have been chosen for a routine mission on the starship USS Tsiolkovsky to the planet Chatub. It was a chance Kathryn would not have given up for anything. Finally, she would travel to another world. Of course, she had traveled to other planets within the solar system. When she was 9 years old, her father took her to the Mars colony as a special treat while he worked on examining the colony's defense systems. Their travels took them to Starfleet headquarters in San Francisco, then on the shuttle Curie to Mars. She asked dozens of questions of the shuttle pilot Cadet Data, the first sentient android in Starfleet Academy, or in the Federation for that matter, and his answers to her many questions confirmed what she began to know. She, too, wanted to join Starfleet Academy. Later, after her father became a Starfleet Vice Admiral and had many duties on the Red Planet, her family visited Mars quite often. But Chatub was different. It was a planet far beyond the realm of the solar system,
light years away from the sun, even farther than the small belt of rocky asteroid-like objects that orbited just beyond the planet Pluto. Chatub was at least 9 light years away from Earth, far enough to employ the services of an Oberth-class starship. Starfleet Academy often chose a small number of first-year cadets to travel with starships on brief missions, as Kathryn's friend Timothy called it, a kind of beginner's guide to starships. This time, Kathryn and the others were assigned to the science ship, the Tsiolkovsky. The mission was not complicated. The ship would deliver medical equipment to the planet, with several Starfleet doctors demonstrating the technology, while the captain would negotiate with the Chatub government to possibly join the Federation. The ship would then head back for Earth, beam the Academy cadets back to Paris, and continue on its next mission. While on board, each cadet would be assigned a bridge officer in order to understand how each officer handles his or her tasks, and especially to see what it's like to work as a team on a starship. Kathryn was particularly excited about her assignment. The Tsiolkovsky's chief science officer, Emma Tapper, was to be her reporting officer. Kathryn wiggled again in her seat. Deep down inside, she wondered if she would do well, or if she would make a complete fool of herself.
If I bit my nails, I'd be doing it right now, she thought. Then again, maybe I should start?
She shook her head, chuckling at her nervousness.
Oh, silly me.
As Timothy began to point to a 3-dimensional drawing of a shuttle entering orbit, Kathryn let out a deep sigh. Geordi LaForge leaned toward her and smiled. "You all right, cadet?" he whispered. Kathryn nodded and smiled back. Geordi leaned closer to her. "I bet you're going on the Tsiolkovsky mission." She stared at him wide-eyed, then squinted.
"And why do you say that?"
Geordi chuckled. "Oh, I don't know. But just by looking around this room, I'd say, let's see," he said, turning his head to look around the auditorium. "I bet Laszlo Rana's going, and I bet Marie Lecoux, too."
"But why do you say that?"
she whispered urgently, intrigued to find out how Geordi knew.
"The list of the cadets going on the Tsiolkovsky's mission is confidential until about a half hour after this class. The chosen cadets are the only ones who know, and they're sworn to secrecy."
"Easy," he said, still whispering. He pointed to his visor. "I can see in the infrared. When someone is really, really nervous, just like I would be if I were going on a mission, I see a brightening in the infrared through my visor. The bright red coloring I see is the excessive amount of heat you're putting out. And of all the first-year cadets in this room, you and the other 2 cadets have the brightest red coloring from the central nervous system. So does Timothy. But he's giving a lecture, so I really can't tell. I get nervous when I give a lecture, too." Kathryn was about to tell Geordi that Timothy was also on the list, but then thought he would find out soon enough. She looked at Geordi, amazed.
"You can see all that with your visor?"
Geordi nodded. "It doesn't always work. But I was just betting that was why the infrared readings from you were high. For all I knew, you all could have just come from gym class. That hikes up the infrared, too."
"I guess I'd better watch my nervous system when I'm around you," Kathryn noted.
She tilted her head and whispered,
"But I have an even better observation, Geordi. I know you weren't on the list. Why aren't you going on this mission? Certainly you would qualify."
Geordi shook his head. "Oh, yeah. I really wish I could go, but I have another commitment called the Academy Band."
"You're in the band?"
"Well, in a way. I'm the roadie," he said, beaming. "I take care of all the setting up and tearing down of the gear for practice and performances and all sorts of things. When they travel, I travel, and we've already been off-world. We're practicing for that big ambassadors conference next week at Starfleet headquarters. We're the entertainment." The bell for the end of class sounded just as Kathryn was about to answer. "I better get going, or I'll be late for practice. Good luck," Geordi said, grabbing his pads and running for the exit. Nodding to Geordi and collecting her pads, Kathryn looked up to see Timothy waving at her from the front of the auditorium. She gave him a weak smile and waved back, feeling guilty. She had not paid attention to a word Timothy said during his entire speech. Then again, she had a feeling the other cadets going on the Tsiolkovsky had the same problem. Kathryn raced from the auditorium, juggling her assignment and duty pads. She had only an hour to get back to the dorm, finished packing, and raced for the shuttle. She knew that the student shuttle, in which cadets practiced flying shuttles short distances inside the Earth's atmosphere, wouldn't wait for her or the other cadets if they were late. Today's practice flight would take the cadets and some medical equipment to Paris, where they would beam up to the Tsiolkovsky. Not only that, she was anxious to contact her parents to tell them the news. She couldn't wait to see the look on her father's face as she told him about her first opportunity to work on a starship bridge, and she could imagine him praising her for a job well done. Still trying to balance the numerous data pads on her left arm, Kathryn was suddenly outside on the academy grounds. The breeze blowing in from the Pacific Ocean was refreshing. For a moment she took a deep breath of air and thought about the beauty and history surrounding her. There were the old trees of the academy, some of the oldest stands in San Francisco. Colorful birds flew from tree to tree, the result of the academy grounds being designated a bird sanctuary for more than a century. And there were the long gravel pathways along which legendary cadets, such as Starship Captain James T. Kirk and Ambassador to many worlds, Grefram Karts, once walked.
"Snap out of it, Kathryn," she thought. "Stick to the task at hand."
Finally maintaining some kind of balance with her pads, Kathryn looked around and took the straightest route, right through a patch of bright, colorful flowers. "Hey, watch what you're doing! You're stepping on the Pachysandra!" Kathryn stopped short and saw an older man waving a small spade. His pants were soiled on the knees and his hands were dark with dirt. Kathryn had heard stories about this man, the academy groundskeeper, Mr. Boothby. She swallowed hard and peered over the data pads.
I'm sorry, sir, but I'm really in a hurry. I have some important things to do, so..."
Boothby held up a hand, and Kathryn stopped talking immediately. "In a hurry, eh? In too much of a hurry to watch what you're doing?"
"Well,
I've known plenty of cadets like you," interrupted Boothby. He shook his head as he bent down and stuck his dirty spade into the rich topsoil.
"That's nice, sir," she said, wondering how she was going to make it back to the dorm in record time. "But really, I have to..."
"One cadet in particular. His name was Paraday." She hesitated.
"You mean Admiral Paraday of the Orion expedition?" she asked, dropping 2 data pads in the process. She stared at the pads but didn't move.
"Same."
He's a legend. Everyone knows about him."
"That's right. And like you and every other cadet, he started here at Starfleet Academy," Boothby said, resuming his digging. "Yes, he was impatient like you, always in a hurry, not focusing on anything. Bold, brassy, always wanting to get ahead faster than anyone would let him. But his impatience was causing him to fail, to be nervous and fumbling. So he invented something to focus on. He called it Paraday's Ladder."
"Paraday's Ladder? What's that?"
"A vision he kept of a ladder, his own ladder. And each day he'd step up one more step, one step at a time. No hurry, just at the right pace."
"Where did the ladder go?"
asked Kathryn, hoping to stump the groundskeeper. "To the stars, cadet," said Boothby, his face turning slightly to look up to the bright sunlit sky. "To the stars." Kathryn took a deep breath and let it out slowly. She reached down and picked up the pads, carefully stacking them in her left arm again.
"Paraday's Ladder. I like it. Thanks, Mr. Boothby.
Boothby.
Huh?
Just Boothby, cadet.
Yes, sir. I mean Boothby. My name is Kathryn Janeway.
I know, Boothby said, winking at Kathryn. Have fun on the Tsiolkovsky, he added, whistling as he continued to dig a hole for a nearby rose bush. Kathryn stared at the groundskeeper for a second, then walked carefully around the flowers to her dorm. First Geordi knew about the cadets on the Tsiolkovsky, and now Boothby.
Some secret, she thought.
Chapter 2. Kathryn pushed her bag strap up on her shoulder for what seemed like the 100th time. She was on her way to meet the other Tsiolkovsky cadets to catch a shuttle to Paris, and she had 2 minutes left to reach the platform. It wasn't her fault. It just seemed as if everything were against her. First, she couldn't find her anti-grav boots, standard equipment for every cadet when packing for off-world travel. Next, it took time to find the basalt rock she always kept with her, the one her father found when they once hiked the canyons of Mars. Then the communication link between Starfleet Academy and her parents on Mars was slow, the result of a stronger than usual solar storm. And to top everything off, her mother and sister, Phoebe, were the only ones there. Her father was at an important Federation meeting. Kathryn ran past a group of cadets reading a wall monitor. Her eye caught the title of the announcement, Tsiolkovsky Mission Cadets. "Hey, Kathryn," one of the cadets yelled as she scurried by. "Congratulations! Send me a postcard." She suddenly swelled with pride. Finally, after the first few months of constant struggle, she felt as if she were really getting somewhere at Starfleet Academy. She pulled on the bag and yelled back, "You bet!"
Forget it.
As Kathryn rounded the corner of the shuttle building, she gasped. The shuttle doors were beginning to close, the engines ready for takeoff. She ran at top speed to the platform, but the doors hissed shut before she could make it inside. Desperate, she started to bang on the door, hoping that somehow it would open again. Looking through the window, she saw Laswa Rana run over and push a panel on the wall. Kathryn practically fell through the door as it whisked open. "Kathryn!" exclaimed Laswa, half catching Kathryn in her arms. "I was beginning to worry."
"You were beginning to worry," she answered, giving her friend a relieved look.
Laswa was a Hasik, and like all her people, she was beautiful. They're all beautiful? With dark round eyes and light-colored skin. She was studying to become a starship navigator, and Kathryn knew she was one of the top cadets in math at the academy. All right, I'll cut it out. Kathryn also noticed, besides the fact that all the cadets seemed to stare when Laswa walked by, that the Hasik's medium-length blonde hair was always straight and perfect, a look that Kathryn could never seem to achieve. It was the only thing that drove her crazy about Laswa, but anyone whose hair was nicer than hers drove Kathryn crazy, and that, she thought, included just about everyone in the universe. "What happened, Kathryn?" Laswa's Hasik accent made it difficult to pronounce Kathryn's name.
"It was a wild morning," she answered, dropping her gear in an empty seat. "You wouldn't believe."
"Wild morning or not, a cadet learns to be on time," hissed a raspy voice behind her, grating on her already fragile nerves. Kathryn turned to see Blinar, who was looking down his long, bumpy nose at her. The cadet's brown and white mottled feathery ears were wiggling quickly back and forth, which Kathryn knew was a sign of aggression. Blinar was from Teji, a planet within the Federation and Romulan neutral zone. She knew his people were confrontational, and she could understand why. For about a century, they had been fighting off Romulan raids on their homeworld. But she didn't want a confrontation. Not today of all days. She gritted her teeth to keep from arguing. Blinar, she was exactly on time, said Laswa, stepping between the two cadets. She is here, is she not? She asked in her usual clipped sentences. Blinar's scaled face scowled at Laswa. His ears quivered slightly. Then my suggestion is that she arrive a little before the assigned time, he said, deliberately ignoring Kathryn, so she can at least approach the shuttle calmly, not beat down the door. He turned and headed for a seat in the front of the shuttle. Laswa shrugged at Kathryn and sat down. I have noticed every day is a bad day, especially for him. Right, but just once I'd like to tell... Kathryn, it is not worth it, she interrupted, carefully pronouncing each syllable. Kathryn dropped into the seat next to Laswa. All right, just this time, though. He's not in charge, even if his reporting officer is the captain of the Tsiolkovsky. As the student pilot slipped the shuttle out of its port, the students buckled their safety harnesses. Kathryn looked around. The other two chosen cadets, Marie Lecoux and Timothy Yang, sat in the rear seats, intently discussing the information they were reading on a data pad. Both cadets were short and dark-haired, and Kathryn knew in the short time they had attended the academy, they had become best friends. Mary was from northern North America and was a descendant of the Yupiak, an ancient Inuit culture. It says Eskimo here, but it's Inuit. Oh, if you care. Timothy was from San Francisco, not far from Starfleet headquarters. He once told Kathryn that his great-great-grandfather was one of the people who helped form the United Federation of Planets in 2161. It seemed as if all of his relatives since then were in Starfleet in one capacity or another. Kathryn reached in her bag for a data pad. She still had 20 minutes before the shuttle reached Paris. She might as well go over her notes about the mission. As she turned on the small pad, she yawned, then closed her eyes. I could sure go for one of my mother's caramel brownies about now, she muttered, to no one in particular. After the shuttle reached Paris, events happened at an astounding rate, and before she knew it, Kathryn was standing at attention in front of Captain Gary Wingate on board the Tsiolkovsky. Welcome to the USS Tsiolkovsky, announced the captain, staring at the five cadets. Kathryn looked straight ahead, hoping the captain didn't notice the beads of sweat forming on her forehead. She had seen Captain Wingate's file before coming on board, and she knew he was one of the youngest captains in Starfleet and one of the best. Kathryn noted that in person the captain was much more imposing than the hollow image in his file. He was just over 6 feet tall, with brown eyes and brown hair, and stood as if he had been in command from the time he was born. I wonder how he does that, she thought. We are now heading for the planet Chatub, Captain Wingate continued. You may want to know, Cadet Rana, that we are on a heading of 033 Mark 15. He nodded to the Hasek cadet, then continued. As you all know, you have been assigned to this starship to help us on this humanitarian mission. Besides dropping off medical equipment, we may be doing some preliminary negotiations to see if the Chatub wish to join the Federation. He looked at each cadet in turn. I must emphasize that you are all representatives of Starfleet, and you will act accordingly. I hope you will learn a great deal from your experiences here and from your assigned bridge officers. Any questions? When no one responded, the captain put his hands on his hips and nodded to the exit. Now go stow your gear in your assigned quarters. Then meet with the first officer, Commander Pago Pago, in Transporter Room 2. You have work to do. And that's when the fun began. Kathryn and the others scurried to their rooms and back to the Transporter Room 2. Commander Pago Pago was already there, and as the cadets lined up near the transporter console, He instructed the transporter chief to energize. Numerous containers and packages of all sizes and colors materialized on the pads. The commander then told the cadets to grab the boxes and take them to the offices on the labels. The cadets dispersed, carrying as many packages as they could in their arms. As the door of the transporter room whisked open, Kathryn heard Blinar muttering under his breath about how they were not being treated like cadets, but like delivery people. Deep down inside, Kathryn agreed, but she said nothing. And an hour later, she was beginning to feel as if she had run several miles. Her feet and legs hurt, and her arms didn't feel much better. As she leaned against a bulkhead on deck 12, her badge chimed. And she was called to transporter room 4. "Oh no, not more packages," she moaned, pushing herself from the wall. I know. One step at a time, Kathryn," she recited and practically ran to the turbolift. The other cadets were already there when she arrived. Commander Pago Pago was explaining their next assignment: take an inventory of the weapons inside the transporter room. Then came the inch-by-inch demagnetization of the transporter, with Kathryn and the other cadets scanning the pads on their knees. And finally, the commander took the cadets to a broken hallway computer panel on deck 10. Kathryn was amazed at how they all sorted through the problem and together found a way to fix the broken panel. Even Blinar was cooperating, his ears hardly moving as he worked. "Maybe he's too tired to be obnoxious," she thought. "I know I am." At the end of the day, Captain Wingate stood before the exhausted cadets, beaming broadly. "And you thought all we did was sit on the bridge," he said jokingly. Kathryn noticed Timothy tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "Cadets dismissed." The next morning, Kathryn, half asleep, looked around the galley and wondered how she got there, or even how she managed to put on her starship uniform. Ignoring the thought, she grabbed a steaming cup of coffee from the replicator and dropped down into a chair. She closed her eyes and sniffed deeply. "Bring me back to life, please," she muttered to the coffee cup. "Are you talking to me, Kathryn?" asked Kathryn's starship roommate Laswa, slipping into the seat across from Kathryn. Timothy, Mari, and Blinar also sat down, setting their breakfast trays on the table. "No, I'm talking to this coffee cup," she said, not opening her eyes. "I see. It does not surprise me, Kathryn." "Talking to coffee cups," Laswa said, chuckling. Kathryn lifted an eyelid to look at her roommate. To her dismay, she noticed that the Hassek's blonde hair was perfect and didn't even move as she laughed. She closed her eye again. "I always talk to coffee cups, don't you, Marie?" "I make it a daily habit," she responded cheerfully. Kathryn opened her eyes slowly and stared at the two friends. "Why aren't you exhausted?" she asked. "Where food is concerned, there's always happy," said Blinar, digging into a green and brown concoction on his plate, no doubt a Teji delicacy. "That's right. Marie and I have eaten our way through some of the best restaurants in San Francisco. We're thinking of writing restaurant reviews for the Academy newspaper," said Timothy. He leaned over the table and looked at Blinar's plate. "What's that, Blinar?" "Teji toadfish," he answered, his mottled ears moving slightly. Kathryn chuckled as Marie and Timothy leaned back in their chairs, each making a face. "So much for the great gourmet of Starfleet Academy." She turned to her roommate. "Aren't you eating this morning, Laswa?" "My people eat small meals," she answered in her usual short sentences. "We eat several times a day. This is not one of the times. I will go to our quarters for a while. I want to work on the planetary exploration paper. Lieutenant Moldov's course is most difficult. And he tried to assign us extra homework at a time like this," added Kathryn, trying but failing to push a stray lock of hair from her face. Oh well. Luckily, he cut back on the homework when he found out we were going on this mission. A small smile crossed Laswa's lips. She leaned across the table toward Kathryn and lowered her voice. "I fooled him. I said we were gone for 4 days, not 7. Too much homework would cause my second stomach to be eaten away by excess acid." "You're the reason why we have less homework?" hissed Blinar, squinting as he looked down his nose at Laswa. The Hasek nodded, smiling triumphantly. "Sneak," whispered Kathryn, smiling back. "But an ingenious sneak." Marie wiped his mouth with a napkin. "Good job, Laswa. But how did your stomachs do yesterday?" he asked, then turned to the others. "Do you believe what we did? And all in one afternoon." "I thought we would take our stations on arrival," Laswa said. "We would be with officers on the bridge. I had no idea. Cleanup and delivery duty all over the ship." Laswa sighed and threw a strand of hair back over her shoulder. Kathryn noticed it fell right back into place. "I will see you later, cadets." As Laswa stood up and walked out the galley door, Kathryn shook her head. She could sympathize with her Hasek roommate. They all had hoped to meet their assigned bridge officers immediately upon arrival, and Laswa had her hopes set on learning all she could from the bridge navigator. Kathryn herself had yet to meet Emma Tapper, one of the most well-known science officers in Starfleet that you've never heard of. She closed her eyes again and took a sip of coffee. "I always thought it had something to do with the ocean." A woman's voice behind Kathryn caught her attention. "What do you mean, ocean?" came the mocking answer, the man's voice booming and echoing off the galley's walls. Kathryn's eyes popped open. "Planet's atmospheric color isn't something that's controlled by the colors of the ocean. What if a planet doesn't have an ocean? No, it's something else, but I'll be hanged if I know." Kathryn looked at Timothy, who shrugged. And she turned around in her seat and faced a man and a woman in Starfleet medical blue at a nearby table. "Excuse us, I think we can help," she said, hesitating as the two officers stared at the cadets. "It's really a simple concept," said Marie, pushing his plate out of the way. "Yes," added Kathryn. The reason why a planet's atmosphere is a certain color is because of the way starlight is scattered by molecules in the planet's atmosphere. In Earth's atmosphere, the longer wavelengths pass through, but the shorter blue rays are scattered in all directions, giving it a blue hue." "Mine is the mostly water planet," responded Blinar proudly. "And our atmosphere looks blue from space, too." And did you know that several centuries ago on Earth, spacecraft images from the solar system's planets were falsely enhanced? Added Timothy, getting into the explanation. They thought some of the planets were certain colors, when in reality they were more bland colors. No one said a word. Kathryn hesitated as they continued to stare at the cadets. Does that make sense? "You're the cadets traveling with us, aren't you?" said the man, almost as if he ignored their explanation. For a second, Kathryn shrank back from the booming voice and straightened her shoulders. "Yes, sir. I'm Cadet Kathryn Janeway, sir. And these are Cadets Blynar, Mary Lacu, and Timothy Wang. The others nodded in the doctor's direction. Yes, I can tell your academy all right, he said, almost accusingly. Well, thanks for your explanations, but I already have entirely too much information crammed into my brain about people problems without worrying about a planet's atmosphere. Thank you. He stood up, his tall, thick frame dwarfing the chair he was sitting in. Doctor, cadets, he said gruffly. He walked out the galley door, his head barely missing the top of the door frame. I'm sorry, cadets. I'm Dr. Sarah Hess, said the thin woman at the table, motioning for the others to sit down opposite her. She pushed back a lock of short red hair from her forehead. I must apologize for my colleague. Dr. Benia Tabasa is a bit ornery in the morning, especially if you ask him to think.
That's okay, said Kathryn, shrugging. My sister Phoebe is the same way in the morning. She loves to stay up late and wonders why she's so tired and grouchy in the morning. And, of course, she never listens to me when I try to explain it.
Dr. Hess laughed. Well, cadets, anytime you want to come down to sickbay and give me an explanation of planetary atmospheres, please do. I won't be grumpy about it. She looked down as her comm badge chirped. Sickbay to Hess. Hess here. Go ahead, doctor, she answered. Kathryn recognized the booming voice. Tabasa here. They've managed to isolate that rotten biofilter. Want to check it out? I'll be right there. Dr. Hess touched her comm badge. Remember, cadets, my door is always open. Kathryn and the others nodded as the doctor turned to leave.
I think I'm going to like this place,
Kathryn thought, heading to the replicator for another cup of coffee.